I'm Kara Infante, and this is Bookish Flights. In each episode, I chat with one bookish guest as we take some time to sample and savor the pairing recommendations from their bookish flight. We hope to give you suggestions to cultivate your TBR list and nurture your leisure time through books. In today's episode, I am chatting with Monica Roe. Monica is a writer, physical therapist, beekeeper, and researcher advocate for the social model of disability and inclusive rural health. A first-generation graduate, Monica studies public health and disability-inclusive disaster preparedness at the University of Alaska. She and her family divide their time between Alaska and their apiary in rural South Carolina. Welcome to the show, Monica.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
I feel like you're so much more than this bio. So can you tell us a little bit about who you are?
Sure. Well, the bio makes it sound kind of scattered, I guess. Well, like you, I was originally a physical therapist, and but took my career in kind of a slightly unconventional direction. And then a year after PT school, I just upped stakes and headed for Alaska. And after working here and there, I kind of found myself in like a remote clinical practice where I would, travel out to remote communities and provide services for a couple days, and then
Okay.
come back.
So was it like home health visits then that you were doing?
No, well, yes and no. So what you would do, like when I was working, I was working for a hospital in Nome, which is, way out on the Russian border. So half the time would be working at the little 25-bed hospital, mostly outpatient. But then what you would do is you would spend about half of your time doing like just field visits. So you'd pack up all your stuff and you would go and sleep in the clinic there in the community. And then people would come and do walk-ins
Wow.
for you. Now, and you might do a home visit or two if someone couldn't get into the clinic, but no, it was mostly like walk-in, just kind of whoever,
Yeah. The PT's here, so come on in.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's how the model worked with pretty much any visiting providers. So, dental, general practice, that's just kind of how that service model works. But, so I got into doing that it was really cool. Definitely. So I did that for a few years and then, with some breaks in between. But then, after I, met my now husband, who was in South Carolina, I switched over to being a pediatric provider, doing the same model, but doing it in some of the remote rural schools, which often had many school sites within one district.
Yeah.
So, for example, like the biggest district I worked for, or the most biggest geographically, had 15 school sites, spread over thousands of square miles, and you just would fly between the communities and check in on 2, 3, 4 would be a lot of kids at one site because the schools are very small.
Sure.
So for the last 10 years of my career, I primarily did that, where you go for 2 weeks at a time, go between a certain number of sites, do evals or re-evals or discharges as you will, but also mostly you're actually setting up programs and teaching people on site how to implement them, because your paraprofessionals or your special ed teachers, families,
Yeah.
and then be available via Zoom in between, because you come 3 or 4 times a year.
Okay. So you were doing telehealth before telehealth was a really big thing for them.
Pretty much, yeah, definitely.
You're a pioneer.
By necessity. But so I did, that was the primary part of my PT career. And then also along the way, I kind of developed a strong interest in, not just the medical disability piece of what we do as PTs, but the social, approach to it, where, you're looking more at inclusivity and disability rights and, not looking at disability as more, a function of a built environment and societal standards and norms that aren't designed for everybody's needs.
Yeah.
As opposed to like a diagnosis that disables you, quote unquote.
Yeah.
So, and that eventually led me kind of into an MPH program at the University of Alaska, Anchorage, where we were living at the time.
Okay.
And so I've been chipping away at that a class at a time. And then I'm focusing a lot of my research and study within that, specifically on disability inclusivity in like climate preparedness.
Yeah.
And specifically climate-related disasters, because a lot of the communities where I worked for a number of years are some of the most threatened and vulnerable in Alaska to coastal erosion, worsening storms, unpredictable weather. There have been a number of times when I've been in a community when we've been shut down for a potential pending disaster, and everyone kind of has to get ready and buckle up and see, and knock on wood, we've been pretty lucky so far, but kind of every time over the years, I've found myself thinking, what would we do if this was really the big one? And, how would we, meet the needs of community members who have disabilities?
Yeah.
So that's kind of informed, again, every paper I write or every project I do, for the program, for the MPH program really has a lot to do with that, especially in rural, geographically remote areas, which adds another level of complexity to, either, the disability experience, the lived experience, or, as a provider of, disability specific services, it adds a layer. You're always, as a provider, you're always, there's not a wait of, a month to get an item. It's often 6 months.
Yeah.
And then, you hope it comes to the right spot. And then you hope it doesn't arrive with a wheel broken off. And then you hope that, things haven't frozen, the battery hasn't frozen in transit, so it won't work. So, there's all these extra layers of barrier or complexity. So it's very, it's a broad topic and one, I think worthy of a lot of study as we kind of move forward into this brave new world of, well, not a new world, but this climate change in general is evolving. So
Yeah. And that's so, I mean, admittedly, I've really never thought about the disaster prepared piece, right? Of in
yeah,
these rural communities. And I'm like, wow, I've never even it crossed my mind. So thank you for opening my world to this because I'm like, wow, it's something I'd like to ponder a little bit. And I mentioned before we got on with all the moving that we do, it's always we move to a totally new area, 5,000 miles away. We have to learn what their local
yeah,
disasters could be. And like, what do we need to do to manage them? I mean, I grew up in the Midwest. I didn't know how to handle a hurricane, And so like, what do? I don't even know how to prepare for that. Like, I know tornadoes, like,
yeah.
and even just those are like the big ones, right? But just as we move around, knowing what do we need to have in the house to be
Mhm.
prepared for whatever natural disasters can potentially strike this new place that we live that we know nothing about. And so I feel like that's always part of our moving process is this little bit of what do we need to
Sure.
have on hand in case?
Mhm.
So, but, and to your point of we have not lived in a rural community, but how that access to gaining things would be so much different and so much harder.
Huge, huge. Yeah. I mean, I regularly, transported wheelchairs on the front of a four-wheeler, through town because
Yeah.
that's what my transport is, or worked on, trying to organize, boxing up a big item from one school and having, the school district's, bush plane come and get it and then, transport it to the next school or we've moved equipment, gosh, from one end of the state to the other sometimes from sometime, because it's just getting things and then keeping them is just hard. And so then you don't want to throw them away. You want to make sure that they have a life, because it's hard to have like a central lending closet
Yeah.
because the communities are so small and scattered so often. Like, oh, let's get this one on the plane and move it here, and then it can go there. There's a whole supply chain logistic, I
That's
guess.
what I'm saying. You almost become like a logistics coordinator on top of that as well.
Probably 70% of my job there was that for sure.
Yeah. Well, are there other providers around the state that you can kind of reach out though and be like, okay, I need this. Do you happen to have this? Or you're kind of, you said making your own lending closet.
Yeah, and they're definitely it's one thing you say about Alaska, it's a big small state. So,
Okay.
it's vast,
Yeah.
by by far the biggest one in the nation. But yes, the networking is very small. There's probably instead of 6 degrees of separation, there's probably 2 degrees of separation in Alaska. Someone always knows somebody.
Yeah.
And there is a very strong sense of community and getting things done. And nobody is phased by these big, huge wacky
Yeah.
delays that come up,
It's a way of life for them.
it is, and no one's surprised. Everyone just kind of go, okay, there's a tsunami warning. All right, well, let's get things going. Or, one year there was the students where in the school where I was, not the students I was seeing in particular, but I was staying in a school and they were doing, statewide testing. And something happened, a cable somewhere down like in like Oklahoma or Kansas, a cable got severed by like a farm vehicle or something. And that somehow ended up like disrupting the IT for the testing for like days. It was something like that, like
Oh my goodness.
specific. It was like something happened in this one spot, and then suddenly like this part of Alaska can't test for,
Where I
because
think to us, we'd be like, is this real life? But to them, they're like, meh, okay, just
it is.
rough.
And it's just, yeah, you can always tell when somebody is new to the area. If they're like, if something happens and people are like, well, we got to get here. Like, I'm supposed to be here this time. And we're just like, yep, that'd be nice. But hopping around mad, it's not going to help.
Yeah.
There's no planes for 6 days. It's going to be that way. We'll get it done. But
Wow. It is on my list of places I would love to visit. I've read a few books set in Alaska, and obviously, like you said, it seems like what like the wild to me, right? And I'm sure it is, but I'm like, oh, I just want like I would go in the summer probably. I'm not a huge winter person anymore
right,
these
right.
days, but
I don't know.
it looks so stunningly beautiful, and it is on my list for one day.
Wonderful things about it for sure. I've been very blessed to, spend so much of my career and see so much of the state that way,
Yeah.
and with and for so many really wonderful people and communities.
Yeah. And I imagine with your job, right, just allowing you to see that. I feel like that's when we move to a new place, it's like, okay, where can we drive? What weekend trip can we take and go explore this and really explore the area that we're living in, like that radius we can
Mhm.
as we're there. And I think knowing we have a finite amount of time and a place to really is a big driver for that. Because it's not, I feel like when I lived in Chicago, right, I took advantage that I lived there. I didn't always go to the museums or do these things because I just grew up there. But now that I know, I'm like, okay, we've got 2 years, we've got 3 years here. Like, we got to do it. We got to be on it and go.
Yeah, you don't take it for granted.
Yes,
For
for
sure.
granted is the right word.
Absolutely.
Well, you have also, we're kind of in the same realm of you've written a book called Air, and it's a middle grade novel. Can you tell us about this?
Yeah, well, I've written like 8 or 9 total, but this is the first one that's gotten, any true like, with a big publisher and true traction. But yeah, so Air is a novel that I think I probably had the initial idea for, like the initial like germ of an idea probably back in like 2014 or 2015.
Wow.
And I tend to be someone for whom ideas can germinate for a long time before there's anything coherent to like put to the page. But I started drafting it in earnest, I think in 2019. So things kind of sat on the burner for a while, for a few years. I started drafting in 2019. It went on submission in January 2020. So
Okay.
right before everything just, went
Yep.
poof. So it was, yeah, it was interesting because my agent had put it on sub in January, which what that means is that, she makes a list of editors at specific
Okay.
public houses that she thinks it would be a good fit for. And so she does essentially a query,
Okay.
um, to all of those. She'll make a letter, um, you know, a portion of the book text, or the manuscript, and then she sends it out, and then most of them will say no thanks, no thanks, but then you kind of wait for that. It's like dating. It's like internet dating. Who finds a home for your book? So
Who's gonna pick me?
pretty much, yes.
Yeah.
And so how that works is, you'll have a first round. She'll make a list of a first round, and then if those all come back and say no thanks, and you make a second round, and you just do that. And so she sent the first round out in January 2020, and just in time for things, and so then we went through a second round and maybe even started a third round. I can't remember. Maybe the third round was getting prepared, I think. And then in May, I think in late April, my editor at FSG showed initial interest in it, and I think in May he offered a deal. Um,
Wow.
to publish it. And so, yeah,
I'm
so it was,
imagining like the elation that that brings for you when that happened
oh,
at that point.
hard to beat, especially in that moment because we were in lockdown then at that moment, and we had actually left Alaska and we were kind of sheltering in place, at our place in South Carolina, where we, owned our place and were near my husband's family. And so, but so I mean, we didn't leave our farm for, 5 months. We were just doing our thing. And so I'd take my daily walk around the field in the blackberry patch. And I remember talking with my editor, on one of those walks and hammering out the details. And it was a very nice bright spot, and something to focus on in that,
The
wild time.
monotony of that time.
Yeah, and just the fear and uncertainty and all of
Sure.
that. It was something to focus. I couldn't write during that time. I felt very mentally scattered during that time, or creatively scattered, I guess I'd say. So I know I had some author friends who could absolutely write during that time. I was not one of them. I was just, my
I
mind.
couldn't even read at one point. Like I just was like nothing was holding my interest and I was just like there's just nothing, which has always been my escape and for I know exactly what you're talking about, like that mental burnout. I was like I can't even focus on a book. There's nothing I want to read, nothing I want to pick up.
I, Absolutely, I would agree with that fully. I remember at one point, just to try and get my head back, I got down Lord of the Rings and I'd make myself read 5 pages a day.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm just gonna read 5 pages of this. And it was hard. It was work to make myself do it.
Yeah.
But the happy thing about, when Air sold is that I could edit. I couldn't read, I couldn't write, but I could edit. So if my
Good.
editor said, "Hey, I think it needs this, isn't it?" I found that I could do that. Because the story was already written. It was
Yeah.
already, it had already been bought. It was, and I had like a team that was like helping me, my editor
Yeah.
saying, "Hey, you thought about this or this," and then and it required some extensive edits, but it was for some reason that clicked. And interestingly, I think that when Air launched in 2022, so it was 2 years from signing the contract to it publishing.
Wow.
It just had its second birthday last week, actually, on the Ides of March. But
Woohoo.
but there was, I think that was one of their, it might have been their first book that was actually a pandemic book, like bought during the pandemic, edited during the pandemic, and
Wow.
we had a virtual launch for it, but I think it might have been, or at least it might have been his first pandemic book. But
Okay.
then we had supply
Wow.
chain issues, when you get the paper, for the printing the books and all that. So,
But
but it got,
you being trained with Alaska, that was probably able to just roll
oh
off
yeah,
your shoulder. Oh, it is what it is. We'll get there.
it was going to be like a year and a half, I think, and then they ended up pushing it back. Oh, no problem. 6 months, sure.
Yeah, I can do that. Well, can you tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about it? Entice the listeners to pick it up here.
It's a middle grade novel. So for, generally speaking, kids about 8 to 12, roughly. And it's set in contemporary rural South Carolina, and it's about a young girl named Emmy who lives with her widowed dad, um, at their family home um, in a small community where she, she's a vibrant part of the community in the school, and she loves speed and getting into trouble a little bit, and she has an aspiration to become a WCMX athlete, which is a wheelchair motocross
Okay.
um, athlete. So it's like if you ever I don't know if you've ever seen any videos of WCMX.
I have not.
Um,
I'm gonna have to
it's
look it up.
Definitely, yeah. She at the beginning of the book, we see Emmy and her best friend Ale, her neighbor. They're in the field behind her house, and they're sneaking. Uh, Emmy sneaking herself and her wheelchair up her dad's old skateboard ramp,
Okay.
and so she's been practicing. They had like a homemade skateboard and dirt bike, kind of set up in the back, back field of their home where they used to play together. But then her mother has recently passed away, and her dad has become a lot more overprotective and hesitant, and doesn't want her on the ramps, and he's very stretched right now, trying to be a single parent
Yeah.
and work long hours, and he's going to school at night to try and finish, his degree, um, so he can become an automotive teacher or instructor at some point. And so they're very, they're a loving family. They're a family that's dealing with grief, and they haven't really maybe talked about the grief.
Okay.
They're just kind of going about things and keeping things going, and there's a lot, it's a very loving relationship. There's a lot going on under the surface, and Emmy is at the beginning of the book where we see her. Is she's got two goals. One is to become really good at tricks and become a WCMXer, but she also wants to earn money she's saving up to buy a good set of wheels. She wants to buy a truly a WCMX chair.
Yeah.
So, a custom chair that's built for this
For
particular sport.
sport. Okay.
Yeah. So, not as you know, as a PT, your average use pediatric chair is for getting you around, doing your stuff, and they can be quite, well designed and mobile, but they're not like heavy shocks and big suspensions and the low profile back and
Yeah,
all.
lightweight. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is like she's wanting, she wants the big tires, the Kevlar seat, the coil, shock suspensions, all of that. And so she and her best friend each have a goal. Her best friend's a beekeeper, and she's saving up for really like a fancy beehive. A really high end fancy one, looks like a little house, and then Emmy's same for the chair. So that we see these girls, and they have this online shop, and it's all found items, things that they find that show up in rural South Carolina. So they have, the big pine cone, the big, loblolly and longleaf pine cones, which, are very sought after for craft certain places. So they've got that. They harvest Spanish moss and, send that. And then they do the fat wood bundles,
Yeah.
and so they're selling stuff. And then Emmy also has her mom's old sewing machine, and she makes customized wheelchair bags for people.
Yeah.
Um, so, because as a connoisseur of such things, she knows that, sometimes a regular backpack, isn't quite the balance if you want it on the
Yeah.
back of your chair. So she designs these bags, and then she started selling them. Um, and so that's where they are when we see them start. And so as it goes through, without giving away too much,
Yeah.
there's a new principal at Emmy's school, and he's very focused on liability. He's very focused on, how the way things should be, quote unquote. And he he doesn't want her doing wheelies at school. He doesn't want her,
Mm.
taking any chances. And also he's probably got a little bit of the savior mentality in him. Um, he's someone who is well intentioned, but really has a lot to learn about, autonomy, and, if
Yeah.
people want help versus whether you think they should want it. So Emmy
Yeah.
finds herself in a specific situation where there is some faulty architecture at her school, because it's an old school. It's not built to code. She's in one of the, more economically disadvantaged part of the state, and just got old infrastructure. There's not an accessible bathroom. There's not good ramps. There's no automatic doors. And the school has made her 504 plan, to meet what they've got there, but they're not really like, okay, we're going to, to invest in infrastructure to,
Sure.
yeah. So there's things that she has to navigate that, she does. And again, she is a kid who likes speed and likes to take chances and likes to go fast. And, so she's not really that phased about a lot of this stuff. And then something happens where some of the architecture fails her at a key moment. And she takes a spill. Not a big deal one. She's like, I fall all the time when I'm, out, working on the ramp in the backyard, like no biggie. And so, she, dusts herself off and goes on her way. But then the principal gets all worried about liability and says, guess what? We're going to get you a full-time aide for school.
Okay.
And for an independent seventh grader who's used to high speed, this is like cataclysmic.
Yeah.
And she's like, I don't need it. I just, need the ramp not to fall apart when I'm on it. I just, I need people not to try and grab my chair. when they see me going up the ramp, and you
Yeah.
need them to get the space to do my thing, so so this ends up in this push-pull, between Emmy and the school, her community, um, and the aide, the aide, Dawn, is a very well-intentioned young lady who, doesn't quite know, she turns out she really needs the job. Because she's got her own, struggles at home. But it's
Sure.
so all of it comes down to Emmy having to kind of decide, okay, how do you speak up?
Hmm.
How do you speak up for yourself? Especially when you're a kid, and especially when you're a kid who people look at and think they know what you need.
Yeah, and I think that's so important for all kids to understand, right? Is where to speak up, where because I feel like we're always told, oh, listen to the elders, right? Listen to the elders, and at a certain point, where do you speak up and say, no, this needs to be heard too? Yeah, I can listen, but this also needs to be heard.
Elders should listen too,
Yeah,
and often do.
exactly. Yes, that like relationship where you have both sides doing that.
For Emmy, she was also in a situation where through most of her life, her mom had been like, the lioness who was like, who'd go to bat for her if she,
Hmm.
in IEP meetings, or, in just in general. She definitely she'd been the one who, not only handled all like the appointments and the follow-ups and the things like the orthotic appointments and this and that, but also just, her IEP meetings and pushing for her to have independence, and, from a structural standpoint, from an institutional standpoint, for pushing the school to be like, we need more accessibility, or, and this is not probably a struggle unfamiliar to many parents and families of
Yeah.
kids who do have, you know, specific needs in the school setting. And, how do you make sure that, your needs are being met in a way that works for you? When her mother died, she kind of lost that person in her corner who was really the one doing most of the battles when
Yeah.
the battles needed to be done. Dad was definitely, he was out there, working the job. He was a mechanic. He always kept her chair in tip-top shape, and he always, was the one teaching her how to do ramps and things like that. But then, he's been kind of thrown into this tailspin as well, where he's, not quite sure what to do except just like keep putting one foot in front of the other,
Yeah.
and they both come to a point where they both need to slow down and actually talk to each other,
Yeah.
like about where they are and what they've lost, and where they both are now.
Oh, I just got the chills because it seems like such a beautiful story of just life, right? In general, and how it happens. And I can even picture that state of grief of like, the only thing I can do today is just put the next foot in front of the other, right? Like how it's so easy to fall into that. But also to have Emmy be the main character because she sounds so vibrant and a great role model for all kids.
I certainly hope so. That was the goal for sure. She's a character who, and I think it's really important to see this in literature. And it's definitely been a more recent push to have authenticity and well-roundedness in characters who live with disability, where
Yeah.
they're not put in a story to serve the story, or
Yeah.
to be, an inspiration, quote unquote, for somebody else's journey or understanding of the world. It's like, she's the one who's driving the show. She's the one whose story it's about. And also, from the beginning of the book, she likes herself. She
Yeah.
loves herself. She is so happy with herself and who she is and what she does. And then she only ends up struggling when she runs up against other people's limited expectations of what she could and should be able to do or want.
That sounds beautiful. So, listeners, that was Air. You have to go out and grab it for your kiddos, even for yourself. I feel like middle grade and YA books, I love them because we can learn lessons from them as well as adults.
I had a writing teacher who said that all children's authors are really just cases of arrested development. So he thinks that he's also a kid's author, and he believes that all of us who end up writing for young readers kind of gravitate to that period in our lives, like either where we really like resonated, or we really got stuck in something, or we had a big trauma. But it's probably no secret that I ended up writing middle grade predominantly. So I'm like, oh yeah, that kind of tracks. Like there was a period, where like books were just like a lifeline for me. And I say I've got a lot of other author friends who have the same. I'm sure it's not across the board, but he's probably not wrong.
Yeah. No, that's going to be another thing that's going to stick with me. I've never heard that, but it's a really interesting concept to think about. So, well, let's switch gears a little bit and let's talk about who you are as a reader. What type of genres do you enjoy?
Good question. Well, these days, some of it is dictated by like where I am in life, the season, as you will. So I mean, I read a lot of middle grade and young adult just because that's what I'm writing, and then most of my writer friends and critique partners are writing and reading. So I
Yeah.
do read broadly there. I have a 7-year old, so I over the last couple of years I've spent a lot of time rediscovering the world of picture books and all the wonderful picture books that are
Yes.
coming out. And I actually have one that's about to be announced that I wrote a picture book. So in a couple of years,
Oh, yay.
so and I never ever would have had the audacity to try that. I don't think if I hadn't read thousands of them to my daughter over the past.
Yeah.
They're not easy, you hear a lot of people say, "Oh, I'll write a picture book one day when I have to." It's hard. It's harder to write a
Yeah.
picture book than I think than a novel in many ways
I
because
always think that as I'm reading with my kids, right? Because I'm like, you have to really condense down a story and hit all the meaningful points in such a short amount of words and space. And yeah, I mean, I obviously haven't done it myself, but I think it all the time that this is has to be so much more challenging than it quote unquote looks.
it is. There's a true art to it, an art and a science, I would say. Because I mean, you've got very specific word counts. I mean, in general, it's preferred that your picture book, your text is 500 words or less.
Wow.
So whereas picture books used to be, and they could be voluminous in length, but no,
Yeah.
a contemporary one, I mean, 1,000 is stretching it mightily. I mean, if you're a super famous author, who's well established, you can get away with that.
Well, keep us posted about it.
The deal announcement hasn't come out, so I'm not able to give more details about, title or
That's
publisher, but it will be soon.
We'll sit here in anticipation.
It is lovely.
Well, and then in your busyness of life, how do you find time to read?
Oh, yes. Well, right now I am reading, I'm on an awards committee. So right now I'm reading a lot of award submissions, so I kind of
Yeah.
have to. But other than that, I mean, I just probably like any other busy person, like some at night, some during the day, some audiobooks, but it comes in seasons because I'm also taking classes,
Yeah.
one at a time, but I'm doing a lot of reading on public health research and, climate and disability research. But it's a challenge. It's a struggle.
Yeah.
Um, I read a
I'm
lot of
sure maintaining that like academic reading versus the leisure reading. I would always, when we were in PT school, I'd be like, I can't even pick up a leisure book during the semester because I knew that that would be all I would want to read.
yeah,
So
because
I would fit it in on like the breaks. I'm like, okay, it's Christmas break. You got 3 weeks. Read as many books as you can.
we're in the car. My husband loves to drive, so he usually does the driving. So I'll read in the car, which is
Oh,
nice.
I wish I could do that. Oh, I get motion sickness.
Oh no.
Yeah. So, well, and then, I have one other question about writing for you that I forgot to ask back in our little writer segment. But what have you learned about yourself through writing?
I think I've learned that I struggle with confidence. It
Okay.
doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many books I write or how many are published, because air is not my first. Um, but whenever I start a new one, I always still spend a lot of time getting in my own way.
Hmm.
And it doesn't seem to get easier, even though you can work through it. But the process, it actually doesn't get easier for me. And I don't mean that in a demoralizing way, but it's something you always, I guess, no matter how many books you write, you always have to sit down and face yourself
Yeah.
when you write and when you face that blank page, and I am just someone who suffers a lot of, I don't know if it's stage fright or imposter syndrome, but
Yeah.
I second guess myself a lot at the beginning.
Yeah. Well, and maybe like you said, it's not getting easier, but now you can recognize it.
True.
for what it is, which I think is huge in itself, right? You can recognize what are these thoughts that are creeping in and getting in my way.
That's a good point. Yes, and I would say for sure. And I realize that I'm certainly not alone in that. As
Yeah.
writing is a solitary sport, if you will, but I've been so lucky to have, developed a huge group of writer friends. None of them live near me, but we're all, like we're all um, available to each other. I'm part of an online critique group with, a bunch, and then I've got some dear friends who we've been writing
Yeah.
together and, cheerleading each other's work for years now. And that everyone, has their own process, but everyone also has their own, crises of confidence or stumbling blocks for sure.
Well, and I think I always am so impressed because there's a vulnerability to writing too. And for
Oh,
me, I think that's where I would struggle is that vulnerability piece and putting yourself out there. And I imagine books as babies, right? Like you've nurtured these for so long when they finally make it to a printed book form that, and you're putting it out in the world.
true. Yeah, absolutely. And once you do that, you have zero control
Yeah.
over how it's received, over, whether someone will read it and, draw a meaning from it that was totally not what you were going for,
Yeah.
and sometimes it might be something that's like, oh, I didn't realize I did that. And sometimes it might be like, that's just totally off the wall. Or,
I didn't even think about that when I was writing, but
yeah. Or sometimes once in a while, it's just like, no, that's just wrong. You're just like,
yeah.
that's a very like a mean review on Goodreads just to be mean. And but
Yeah.
that's life, that's people. But yeah, you definitely being a writer, I think, or a resilient writer requires, at least from me, like the ability you have to be able to be raw and tap into those raw feelings that make a book, worth reading. But then you also have to be able to have like this alligator skin for criticism.
Put it back on.
Yeah, you have to. You have to step out of the alligator suit to, to get the book out. And then, but then because you're going to get feedback all along the way, you're going to get feedback from your critique partners, and then from your agent, and then from your editor, from your first editor, and then your copy editors, and then, your production team. And then you're going to get
Wow.
trade reviews and Kirkus and Publishers Weekly. You're going to get, I mean, and some of them are going to be hard. And you just kind of have to, or it tends to go best, I guess, if you can be like, okay, deep breath. Some people even say that don't read your reviews. Just don't even read them.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. That book's done.
I could see where that mentality would take over, you know.
You can't take it back now, you know.
Yeah.
And if you write something that everybody likes, you probably wrote maybe a boring book.
Yeah.
What is there on this earth that everybody's going to like?
Yeah.
So
And that's where I don't like on the show or my page, like if there's a book that just did not work for me, I just kind of keep that close to the cuff because I really like not all books are
right.
written for me, right? And I think that books come into our life. It's the last quote I have in the show when we most need them. And there's seasons of life that I might not be ready to receive that story, but it could work for the next person. And so I'm like, I'm not, here to sit and bash books or say,
Right.
that book didn't work for me because it will work for the next person. It just didn't work for me in that moment, in that season of life.
That's a great way to look at it, actually. That's something to keep in mind, especially, you know, there are hard conversations going on about books and reading, and it's a lot. That's a really good way to look at it.
Well, you have also brought a book flight for us today. Can you tell us a little bit about how you chose these books?
I chose a flight of books, all by dear friends and fellow authors that are just books for young readers that I just think are feel good books.
Yeah,
And I figure we could all use some positivity, and
absolutely.
that's it. It's not particularly like cerebral how I chose, but it's like these books I feel good when I read them. I feel happy when I read them. They're
Yeah.
uplifting. So the first,
Okay.
Pride and Premeditation.
I
Uh,
love it. Listeners, you have to go check out this cover.
yes, absolutely, yes. And this is the first in a series of three Jane Austen murder mysteries by my dear friend Tears of Price. And there are more coming. She's written Pride and Premeditation, Sense and Second Degree Murder, and Manslaughter Park. And
I
then
love it.
uh,
I'm
two
drawn
more,
in already just from that.
will not be sorry. There are two more in the pipeline as well that will bring Lizzie and Darcy back for more.
Oh,
It reimagines Lizzie and Darcy as crime investigators.
I love it.
So yeah, so
Oh,
Pride and Premeditation, that's I don't think it needs any more introduction than that.
yeah, absolutely. How unique and so fun. I love the concept.
So that one, I think that you can't go wrong with those, and they're just any Austen fan for sure. They're just a fun romp, and I
Okay.
like that. And the Tears always puts one caveat that they're not meant to be read as like sticking, absolutely, you know, truly to, Regency England. It's not they're not supposed to be historical. They're
Okay.
historical, so yes, there'll be anachronisms and yes, there'll be some, so don't read this if you're an Austen scholar looking for, an exact, you know, you probably
Exact line comparison.
want a fun crime romp that, has all your favorite characters from the Austen books, go grab them because they're
Love
fun.
it.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was Pride and Premeditation by Tears of Price. What's the next book you brought today?
Look, I don't have a copy with me, but it is called No Vacancy,
Okay.
a middle grade novel by Zipporah Cohen.
Okay.
And this is a beautiful middle grade book that it follows a Miriam and her family. They due to some circumstances, some financial circumstances, they relocate from their home in New York City up to rural upstate New York, you know, way over like in the the central western part of the state, and take over an old rundown motel. And it follows their journey as the only Jewish family in this town, and her certainly missing, the life she's left, and all her friends, and then she makes friends with a Catholic girl who is, connected with, this diner where she goes and meets another lady. It's a at its heart, it's a romp because the girls hatch a plan to that involves a Virgin Mary apparition at this local abandoned drive-in theater.
Okay.
The way to to bring people to the town and to increase business for the motel and the town, and for reasons that make very good sense to them at the time. But then it turns into a really beautiful story of community and people of different faiths, even if they may have a very different understanding of some fundamental things, how you can come together and be a community and be there
Yeah.
for each other on many levels. And it's just a story that it explores a lot of those big concepts in a very accessible and uplifting way.
Yeah. And I think that's so true. That's like holds close to my heart. We can all be still be a community together despite our differences. So,
It's a lovely one. So
okay. All right. So that was No Vacancy by Zipporah Cohen. And then what's the last book you brought today?
Roll for Initiative,
Okay.
Jamie Formato. And this is just a super fun one. This is I have seen very few middle grade books that focus on D&D, Dungeons and
Okay.
Dragons, and especially from a girl's perspective.
Yeah.
So this story follows Riley, and she's kind of at the beginning of the book, she's in the bus line after school, and she's panicking because she doesn't remember which bus she rides. And she's in sixth grade, so this might seem strange, but it turns out her older brother Devin has left for college, and
Okay.
he used to drive her to school, and so she's not having to navigate it by herself. And she's just at the beginning, she's just kind of frozen. She doesn't know what to do, and you see that she has really not had to do much on her own because Devin actually used to manage everything for her. And then you go in further and you see that her mom is a single mom, working long hours, at some a superstore of certain sorts, and so she's always tired and she's always, doing her very best for the family. after their dad left, Devin stepped in, was much older than Riley, and kind of played parent. And so he kind of like
Okay.
managed everything and organized everything, to the point where Riley wasn't actually being allowed to develop on her own and develop some of these life skills. And they were also really into D&D together. Well, he's out in California now, going to college for video game development. And so Riley is kind of left to her own devices. And at first she's like, there's no clean laundry there. What am I supposed to eat? And she's, socially, struggled a bit. And Devin was always her best buddy, and they played D&D together. And well, she starts making friends. First she meets a girl on the bus line and she's panicking. And then, she meets somebody else who lives in an apartment complex, and it slowly expands. And suddenly you've got, this group of 4 girls, that are playing D&D together, and they meet in the lawn, the creepy, shadowy, spidery laundry room in their apartment complex. And they start, going on campaigns and playing D&D, and really, she starts blossoming that way. And well, then her brother comes home. It turns out he's struggling in college, and so he's come back to try, and he's in a bit of a tailspin because he's not sure, if he's going to make it, out there. So he comes back and he decides to start like micromanaging her life again. And suddenly she's like, well, I don't really like this. I've been actually getting my independence, and it's just, it sounds simplistic, and it is a gorgeous book about relationships. It's got strong, healthy, tween girl friendships, which are really well done. And they've, and yeah, and then the family is drawn so well and so sensitively. And having grown up raised mostly by a single mom myself, who was always stressed out and tired out, and that really resonated with me, and I thought it was just so beautifully done. And yeah, and then there's also this thread of the girls' characters as well, the characters that they play in D&D, the characters they built for themselves, and the campaigns they take them on. That kind of parallels some of the journeys of the characters as well. And it's you just feel so like lighthearted when you finish reading it.
Yeah. And what a good book. Sometimes I feel like the relationships written into books, especially the early chapter books for my kids, right? I'm like, oh, well, we don't talk like this in our house. It's just, it's so fluffy, and like, or if they're kind of catty, and I'm like, I don't want my kids reading this. Like, it's not just because I'm like, we don't use this language in our house. I don't want you to think it's okay to treat people like this. And so I might pull some things like, nope, we're not reading that. And so this sounds perfect, where it's this loving and like fruitful relationship between kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's got the siblings, it's got the mom, it's got the and the father's not great, but that's shown realistically.
Yeah.
No one's like a true villain in it. They all have their struggles, and they all have their areas where they need to, they all need to step up in certain ways. But it's all gentle, and it's they love each other through it all.
Yeah. Which is important.
Yeah, it's not intense in any way. I know it's been billed as kind of a quiet book, and that can be hard for books sometimes if they get labeled that way, because there's no action, there's no, but it is,
Yeah.
it is a yeah, it's just a joy to read.
Okay. All right. So that was Roll for Initiative by Jamie Formato. And then how I love to end our show here is with our bonus pairings. These are just a speed round of questions, so you can answer these really quick. Are you a rereader?
Oh yes, compulsively.
Love
Especially
it.
if I need comfort, I'll grab something I've read 20 times before.
I love that. What is one book you've read that has changed your life?
Ah, I think Good Omens by Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman, which is an odd
Mm,
choice. It's not a young reader's book, but I read that back in college, long before the Amazon series ever came out. That's more recently
yeah.
enjoyed a renaissance. But I had never read Neil Gaiman before. I read Terry Pratchett a little bit, but that was my real introduction to both of them. The two British um, fantasy authors, and the pairing of their writing was just amazing. I'd never seen like true. I'd always been a fantasy reader since I was young, but I'd never
Yeah.
never ventured into the satirical comic fantasy. And Terry Pratchett, of course, is like, the master of comic
Of that.
satirized fantasy, and I've since become a huge fan of him. And then Neil Gaiman has, more of like a dark fantasy, you know, bent to his work, and the two of them, how they paired together and wrote that collaboration with those two characters, and if you are familiar with the story, it's about, an angel and a demon who are both like, they're like the representatives on Earth of their respective head offices.
Okay.
So, so Aziraphale is this kind of like this fussy angel, who owns a bookshop, and he's, heaven's, man on the ground. And then Crowley is like this kind of, like laissez-faire demon who, he's, wears sunglasses and drives a Bentley, and he's all black leather and, loves his plants. And so, but they have been enemies. They're supposed to be enemies, and they've been on Earth so long, and their head offices are so kind of disengaged, they've kind of become friends. And then they realize that they can, they can make their jobs easier if they like team up, because they're supposed to be supporting each other the whole way. They're like, well, if we just kind of, do each other's work now and again, it'll make it easier. We send the memos to heaven and hell, and, no one's the wiser. So, but the story aside, just the way those two, for some, I can't even explain why it's my favorite book, but something about that blending. I think the way fantasy can shine a light on the world. I've always loved fantasy, and sci-fi can do that, but then you add that comic satirical element, and it's just, you're laughing while you're thinking hard.
Yeah. It's like, it is two dichotomous things I feel like going on, but you're doing it in the same book. And I have not read this, nor have I watched the show. And I was just introduced to Terry Pratchett way back, I don't know, in like the 40s or the 50s episode. She brought one of the books was Terry Pratchett, and I had never even heard of Terry Pratchett. And so now you've really intrigued me. I have to read this one.
And he is extremely prolific. He wrote the Discworld series, and there probably were, dozens of Discworld books. And he was the one to truly, I think Douglas Adams, I think he was inspired by The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but then he took that comic fantasy genre and just, exploded it. And I think that as a writer, it can be really hard when you're writing, because we all have some message we want to send somehow. Whether it's, and when you're so close to it and you're writing, it can be really hard not to want to pound home the message. This is what I want you to learn from my book. And it's really not that much fun to read, when you're like pounding a pulpit.
Like you're being preached to. Yeah. You're like, nope, this isn't falling.
No one really enjoys that so much, so, and I am very in awe of the ability of humor to really like make you think and consider things that otherwise you might just say, that doesn't apply to me, or gloss over. And I think I aspire for that in my writing. I have a lot of work to do, I think, to get there, but that's something I always try and keep in mind, is how can you make people laugh to make them think?
Yeah. I love that. We need to have that as like a quote for our show, for our episode together.
If you laugh, make you think.
Yeah. All right. And then where is your favorite place to read?
We've got a hammock that I quite like.
That sounds lovely. I like, yeah, if I had a hammock, I'd be out there too.
I've done more reading on bush planes. Probably what I've done, most of my reading's been on bush planes in the past decade and a half.
Yeah.
Knees up in your face, or,
Yeah. You're like, I'm on here, so I might as well read.
As well, yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely the hammock is best.
Yeah. Okay. And then lastly, what are you reading next?
I am reading. It's the next book in my Whippoorwill Award pile. It's one of the next award submissions. So.
Okay.
I haven't chosen it yet, but I just finished Harvest House by Cynthia Leidig Smith. That was the last one I read.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I know your time is precious, and I appreciate all you've given me.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
You are so welcome. Thank you so much for listening to this episode today with Monica Roe and her Feel Good Books for Young Readers book flight. We'd love to hear what other books you'd pair with this book flight at bookishflights.com. Bookish Flights has been nominated in 2 categories for the People's Choice Podcast Awards. The listener voting period goes until July 31st. I'd be honored if you could cast your vote at www.podcastawards.com and vote for us in the categories of Best Female Hosted Podcast and Adam Curry's People Choice Awards. You can find more information in our show notes. That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. As Emma Thompson said, I think books are like people in the sense that they'll turn up in your life when you most need them. Cheers to you, dear readers. Until next time.